Well, good evening, everyone, and welcome. Thanks for tuning in this evening for our online Bible study. Let's get into it. I welcome you. If you are new to this study, I'm Pastor Dave St. Aubin. It's a joy to be with you here this evening. Tonight, we begin our look at the book of Habakkuk. So I invite you to grab your Bibles, open them up to Habakkuk chapter 1, grab something to take some good notes with, grab a beverage, and grab a snack. Let's get into it. Well, again, good evening and welcome, and thanks for tuning in. I do pray that your day has been going well. Pray that you had a wonderful weekend. Happy Monday. Good to be with you here again as we continue our journey through the Bible one chapter at a time. And we are now into the book of Habakkuk. And so, welcome. I appreciate you being here. We began this study way back in September of 2022 with Genesis chapter 1. And one chapter at a time every weeknight since that night. We have made our way through the Bible, and now we are in the closing stretch here of the Old Testament with just a few more books to go, and tonight we are in Habakkuk. So this interesting book, very short, only 3 chapters, so we will look at one chapter each night this week, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday, and then we will move into the next book, which is Zephaniah on Thursday. But Habakkuk, the title of this book comes from the name of the author, Habakkuk. Now, the meaning of that name is very questionable, a lot of different interpretations as to what it means. It may come from the root word for the Hebrew verb habak, which means to embrace, or it could mean a folding of the hands. Some interpretations take this name to mean that Habakkuk embraced his people to try to comfort them. Others interpret this that he is embracing the problem of divine justice in the world, which that's really the subject of this book. So all kinds of different interpretations. We really don't know what the name itself means for sure. What we do know is that he was a prophet, that he lived during the pre-exile period in Israel's history, so in mid-7th century BC, and that's really all we know. Now, when we get to chapter 1 here in just a few moments, we're going to see this designation of the prophet. There's really no other defining characteristic here. This is not unique to this book. When we get to Haggai and Zechariah, we see this again, just the name and the designation, a prophet. So we really don't know what his name means. We really don't know for sure the time period, pre-exile, 7th century BC. That's really what we know about the person. What we know about the content, though, is this is a wisdom literature. It's a psalm. It's a psalm of praise. And that type of writing, wisdom literature and psalms, it indicates that Habakkuk was a poet, that he wrote in that particular style of writing. So he's a prophet. He's a poet. He's often been referred to as the free thinker among the prophets. The New Testament really doesn't give us a whole lot of information. There are quotes of Habakkuk in the New Testament, and we'll look at some of those. But the writers of the New Testament didn't share a whole lot of information about who he was. There are some traditions, but nothing that we can say for certain. And the last verse of this book, so when we get to chapter 3 on Wednesday, we're going to see that the writing gives a bit of a musical notation, which is similar to some of the Psalms. So this is an indication that Habakkuk was also possibly a musician. And because he's a musician, possibly he was out of the Levitical tribe. He's a Levite. We don't know a whole lot about him. So here's what we know about the prophecy, though, is that God's going to tell Habakkuk that God, is going to raise up the Babylonians, these fierce people who were already marching throughout the earth, conquering other people, and that they're going to expand their territory even further. And we're going to see that tonight in chapter 1. The first of the Babylonian kings that's referenced is in the time period of Nabopolassar. So again, mid-7th century, 620 BC or so. It's a time before the period where the Babylonians defeated the united Egyptians and Assyrians and became this dominant power at the time. So this is before the Babylonians came in, defeated Israel, and took them into captivity, but not much farther before, because God's going to give this prophecy that this is going to take place. So the Babylonians, they're on the rise in the time of Habakkuk. That being the case, he probably lived in Judah, because at that point the Assyrians had already defeated the northern kingdom Israel, and now the Babylonians are gaining strength and power. So what we can glean is he's a prophet, 7th century BC, before the exile in Babylon. He wrote in a poetic psalm-type style. He includes this musical notation at the end of his letter, which indicates he's possibly a musician, possibly a Levite, and lived in the southern kingdom Judah, which means he would have been ministering to the people of Judah. So we don't know too much, but we can at least glean this out of it. And what we looked at in Jonah was dealing with the problem in Nineveh, right? And that's what we just looked at in the last book as well. Habakkuk deals with the problem posed by the Babylonians. So this is all about the rise in power of Babylon, the prophecy about the Babylonians coming into the southern kingdom Judah, defeating them, taking them into exile. It's all before that takes place, but that's the message of this prophecy. And again, his name possibly means to embrace, so maybe he's embracing his people here to give them some type of comfort. But what he's going to do here through this poetic writing is deliver this message from God to the people in Judah. So let's get right into it here. Again, a short book, so just 3 chapters here. We'll look at the first one tonight. Open up to Habakkuk chapter 1. If you don't have a Bible with you, not a problem. As always, all the verses are right here on the screen for you, so you can follow along, take some good notes, and it starts out with this little introduction, the prophecy that Habakkuk, the prophet, received. And that's what we know about him. He's a prophet receiving a prophecy from God. And this prophecy is going to pose a burden. So depending on your translation, you may see the burden that Habakkuk received. This is a burden which God is going to lay on Habakkuk. It's a message predicting this judgment on Judah, which was going to come from the Babylonians. So we don't know a lot about Habakkuk, but we know he's a true prophet of God because he's going to deliver this message. So next verse. And he's going to ask God a couple questions here. And God's going to respond with answers. And the first question is about Judah. That's verses 2 through 4. So this is a lament. It's similar to many of the other psalms of lament. This This little book of Habakkuk, it opens in gloom, doom and gloom, and then Wednesday, when we close this book, it's going to end with glory. It begins with a question mark. It's going to close with a exclamation point. But here's the first of these two questions that Habakkuk is going to ask God. Verse 2, how long, Lord, must I call out for help, but you do not listen? Or how long must I cry out to you violence, but you don't save? So he's praying, Habakkuk is, and as he's praying, he's asking God, how long? How long do I have to keep praying for help before you respond to that help? Now, God hears all prayers, right? God is omniscient. He's all-knowing. But Habakkuk here is complaining that God hasn't given enough evidence of him hearing and responding to this prayer. He's crying out, God, this violence is continuing. You're not providing deliverance. How long do we have to wait? Verse 3. Why do you make me look at this injustice? Why do you tolerate wrongdoing? Destruction and violence are all around me. There's strife and there's conflict abounding everywhere. Habakkuk wants to know why God is allowing this disaster and this destitution that he has to observe every day. God, how long are you going to allow it to continue in Judah? Now, these words, destruction and violence and strife, they weren't just occurring, they were increasing. But Habakkuk is saying, it's getting worse, Lord, but you're not doing anything about the situation. That word violence, or similar to that word, occurs 6 times in this little book of Habakkuk. That's an unusually large number of times for a short book, for that many mentions of violence or destruction. And this word in Hebrew of destruction or violence, it doesn't just mean physical brutality. It means a flagrant violation of moral law by which one person injures another person. And so by piling up all these synonyms of injustice and strife and violence and all these things, Habakkuk is stressing the severity of the oppression that is taking place in Judah. And again, this is before the Babylonians came in, 7th century. This may be a reference to the time in the history of Judah when King Jehoiakim ruled, because he was an evil, wicked king in Judah. And so as Habakkuk sees this injustice, he's asking God, why aren't you doing anything about it? Verse 4, therefore, because you aren't answering, Lord, the law is paralyzed, and justice never prevails. The wicked hem in the righteous, so that justice is perverted. So since, God, you aren't intervening to stop this tide of evil and injustice, which is what God had threatened to do in the law through Moses, but since God had not yet done anything about making sure his law was followed, the Judeans took that as, we can just ignore God's law. He's not going to do anything about it anyhow, so what do we have to worry about? And so they stopped practicing justice. They stopped practicing justice in the courts. The wicked dominated the righteous. The powerful dominated the weak. These were the conditions that were common in the time of in the land of Judah at the time of Habakkuk. Just rampant injustice. And from God's reply that's going to follow, that we're going to see, it's very clear that there were others in Judah who were praying these prayers to God besides Habakkuk and asking these questions of God, right? How long are you going to allow these people to oppress other people? And even though God isn't responding to this prayer here, he will. And Habakkuk is in fact going to record God's answer to that prayer. And so this is a revelation that is it's a oracle. It's a divine pronouncement of what is to come. So injustice in the land, God, why aren't you doing anything about it? And this lament continues, verse 5. But God's responding now, right? Verse 5, look at the nations and watch and be utterly amazed, for I am going to do something in your days that you would not believe even if you were told. So God's telling Habakkuk, and he's telling the others in Judah who are concerned about this same thing, because we know this because the word you and your, I'm going to do something in your days that you would not believe. That's a plural pronoun. It's not just the singular Habakkuk, it's plural. So God's telling everybody that's praying to him, direct your attention away from what's happening in Judah to what's happening in a very large arena in the ancient Near East, right? Watch what's about to happen. Observe what's coming. This thing that's coming is going to astonish you, right? You've never seen anything like it, and you're going to see that I, God, is responding, and I'm going to do something about it to the point that you won't believe. Even if somebody tells you about it before it happens, you're not going to believe it. You've never seen anything like this. And what's he going to do? I'm raising up the Babylonians, that ruthless, impetuous people. So God is urging Habakkuk, and he's urging those who are praying to him to be just watch and look and observe that he, God, was in the process of doing something about this injustice. And what he's doing is he's raising up the Babylonians as a power in the world. Now, the Babylonian Empire began to rise to world domination when King Nabopolassar of Babylon took the throne, which was 626 BC. So again, this is in the time of Habakkuk, mid-7th century BC. Nabopolassar was an aggressive king. And what he did is he stimulated the Babylonians into becoming a ruthless, impetuous nation. That by the time of Habakkuk, the Babylonians had already marched throughout the Near East, the ancient Mid East at this time, and conquered everybody. They were growing in power. So here's what I'm doing. I'm rising up the Babylonians who will sweep across the whole earth and seize dwellings that are not their own. So God's revealing, I'm going to do something about this, and the instrument that I'm going to use, the rod of punishment that I'm going to use on the people of Judah, these unjust people, is Babylon. Just as Assyria was God's instrument in judging the northern kingdom Israel, so here the Babylonians would be his instrument in judging the southern kingdom Judah. God is saying, I'm going to do this, and it's going to be unbelievable. Verse 7, they are afeared, the Babylonians. They are a dreaded people. They are a law unto themselves, and they promote their own honor. So the nations at the time, they dreaded the Babylonians because the Babylonians were ruthless. The only law they answered to was themselves. They lived by their own rules. They didn't live according to any type of conduct at the time, what we would think of like a Geneva Convention. They did what they wanted to do, and they came in and rampaged whoever they wanted to rampage. Verse 8, their horses are swifter than the leopards. So that's just a comparative. The military instruments that the Babylonians used were state of the art. They used horses, which were major implements of war, but they used horses that were the fastest horses, faster than leopards. So is that hyperbole here? Probably. But what it means is they were the fastest weapons at the time. They were fiercer than wolves at dusk. So the Babylonians, fiercer than the wolves at dusk, just meant that they were more eager to attack their enemies than wolves were. They were coming quickly. They were going to attack without concern for anybody. Their cavalry gallops headlong. Their horsemen come from afar. They fly like an eagle, swooping to devour. So the mounted soldiers, the cavalry, they would swoop down on their enemies fast on these fast horses. They would come as a unsuspected eagle or a vulture. They would dive from the sky to devour like a small animal on the ground. And of all these animals, the horse, the wolf, the eagle, these were all used for comparison to Babylon because these were excellent hunters. They were fast. They were fierce. They were the top predators in the animal world at this time. And by the time we got to Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon, his cavalry was legendary for their speed. They would pursue relentlessly. In fact, they pursued the Egyptians more than 150 miles just so they could destroy them completely after they had a battle at Carchemish. So the Babylonians that God is going to rise up here, this is going to be bad for the people of Judah. They're not going to see anything like this. They've never seen anything like this before in their lives. What's about to come? Verse 9, God continues. They all come, these Babylonians, intent on violence. Their hordes advance like a desert wind, and they gather prisoners like the sand. Like the Assyrians, the Babylonians loved violence. The faces of their warriors showed their love for violence and for battle as they moved forward in their conquest. And they were as effective in capturing the enemy from other countries and whisking them away. They were as effective in doing that as the hot winds were that blew across the desert from the east that drove the sand ahead of it. This enemy, the Babylonians, were going to advance in on Judah like a whirlwind. They would capture people as innumerable as the grains of sand on the earth. They're going to cause great destruction. Verse 10, God continues, they mock kings, they scoff at rulers, they laugh at all the fortified cities by building earthen ramps to capture these fortified cities. So the kings and the rulers of the lands that the Babylonians overran, they were no threat at all to the Babylonians. The Babylonians weren't worried about any other king of these nations. In fact, they laughed at these other kings. They mocked them. They scoffed at their fortified cities. And what they did when they came in is they would heap up dirt to build a siege ramp to capture these foreign cities, to defeat these fortifications. They didn't need any special machinery to do this. They used what they could, but they just used dirt. And that's how they built these ramps to conquer these cities. And so they scoffed at these other nations. They mocked their leaders. They laughed in their faces. You're not going to stop us. Verse 11. And then they sweep past like the wind and they go on. Guilty people whose own strength is their God. So the Babylonians swept through the lands at this time like the wind, and they would pass on from one doomed nation to the next. They would just go from one to the next, wreaking havoc and defeating these nations. But God's going to hold them guilty, and that's what that means. Guilty people. God's going to hold them guilty because they, the Babylonians, worshipped power as their God instead of the one true God. And that's the reason God's going to judge eventually the Babylonians. He's going to use them as an instrument of judgment against the people of Judah. But then he's going to punish them because they worship false gods. They worship their own power. And had Habakkuk listened to the last line of God's answer here, that I will hold them guilty. Had he really listened to that response, he probably would have avoided asking this next question that we're going to look at, which is one that just perplexed his soul. He's going to ask a question about Babylon. And this is another lament, and it expresses the problem of punishment. So verse 12. So he asks this first question, how long are you going to allow this to happen? God says, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to use these Babylonians. And I'm going to, he ends it, hold them guilty. But then Habakkuk follows up with another question. Lord, are you not the everlasting, my God, my Holy One? You will never die. You, Lord, have appointed them to execute judgment. You, my rock, have ordained them to punish. So what Habakkuk is saying to the Babylonians, power is their God. Power is not my God. Lord, you are my God. It's your revelation of what you're doing that is going to bring confidence to my lips, is what Habakkuk is saying. But then with this rhetorical question, he's implying that, yes, you are the true God, and you are from everlasting to everlasting. And I understand that you are appointing the Babylonians to carry out this punishment and to judge the people of Judah. And you've been the rock, our strength, our safety. But what are you going to do about it? It's Habakkuk is struggling. He gets his answer from God, but look at what he says here, verse 13. Your eyes are too pure to look on evil. You cannot tolerate wrongdoing. So why are you tolerating wrongdoing, right? Why are you silent while the wicked swallow up those who are more righteous than themselves? Because Yahweh is holy, verse 12, Habakkuk knows that God cannot look upon evil. He can't favor wickedness. God can't stand sin. And that's a basic tenet of the faith of Israel. But in Habakkuk's mind, all that does is it raises another question. If you can't look on these things, why are you looking on these things? It appears, Lord, like you are looking approvingly on these things. Why don't you do something about everybody, right? Even the Babylonians. Why are you using them, these people who slaughter other nations? Why don't you do something about them? So his first question in verses 2 through 4 came out of like an inconsistency between God's actions and God's character, right? God, why are you allowing this to happen? Why are you looking away? Why? The second question, he's saying God is a just God, but he's allowing these terrible sinners to succeed, and he's even permitting the Babylonians to succeed. And so why? How can you do that, God? If you are a holy and just God, how can you look on these Babylonians and not just annihilate them? And so these questions, they perplex Habakkuk. It's not that he has a weak faith. He has a very strong faith. But the way that God is working out his sovereignty is just, it's perplexing to Habakkuk. He's not understanding. So verse 14. Now he's going to ask some more questions. You've made people like the fish in the sea, like the sea creatures that have no ruler. So Habakkuk is asking God, why did you make people like the fish and other sea creatures that apparently have no ruler restraining them? In other words, in the hierarchy of the sea, the big fish eat the little fish, and the bigger fish eat the big fish, and the biggest fish eat the bigger fish. And the same thing's happening in Habakkuk's world. The smaller countries are being gobbled up by the bigger countries, and the bigger countries are being gobbled up by Babylon. And so this is all unjust. God, why are you not intervening here? Verse 15, the wicked foe pulls all of them up with hooks. He catches them in his net. He gathers them in his drag net. And so he rejoices and he is glad. So this is Habakkuk saying Babylon is like a fisherman who's taking over the nations and taking them captive like fish on a hook, right? Just gathering them all up and holding up their fish line and saying, look at this good catch. Earlier, he had compared Babylon to hunters, verse 8. Now he's comparing them to fishermen. And in fact, there are many Babylonian monuments in archaeology that depict the Babylonians driving a hook through the lower lip of their captives and then stringing them along in single file as they led them away into captivity. That was a practice the Assyrians started. The Babylonians took it and they continued it. And so Habakkuk is like, how are you allowing this to happen? Verse 16, therefore he sacrifices to his net, he burns incense to his drag net, for by his net he lives in luxury and he enjoys the choicest food. So the Babylonians even worshipped the tools that they used to make this impressive conquest. They didn't just worship a false god. They worshiped the tools that they used to defeat these other nations. The Babylonians had as little regard for human life as fishermen have for fish. It's just another catch. We got another catch, right? We have another good day. And in Habakkuk's mind, that God would allow that to continue just seemed unjust. He doesn't understand God's purpose here. Verse 17, is he to keep on emptying his net, destroying nations without mercy? So Habakkuk's asking God, the Babylonians, they continue to capture everybody like fish. Are they just going to be allowed to continue to just drag fish out of the ocean and capture without anybody doing anything about it? And up to this point, God did not interfere with Babylon's wickedness. And that perplexed Habakkuk. More so than the question, how can you not do something about Judah's wickedness? That was the first question. God, look at everything going on here in our nation. How are you not doing anything about it? God says, watch what I'm about to do. And then Habakkuk's focus shifts, right? How are you not doing anything about the Babylonians? Because that doesn't seem possible either. It was just kind of mind-blowing to Habakkuk. Are you allowing this country to continue capturing these other countries without doing anything about it? Those are the questions that perplexed Habakkuk, and that is Habakkuk chapter 1. And I pray that that has been a help to you. Again, a short little book, just 3 chapters. So tomorrow we will look at chapter 2, and we're going to look at God's answer about this question that Habakkuk poses about what are you going to do about Babylon, right? The first question and answer we saw. What are you going to do about the injustice in Judah? God says, watch what I'm going to do. I'm going to use Babylon. The second question, what are you going to do about the Babylonians? And that's what we're going to see tomorrow in chapter 2. And Wednesday, we'll wrap up the week. And then Thursday, we'll move into Zephaniah. So thank you for being here this evening. Again, I do pray that this study has been a help to you. Have a wonderful rest of your evening. Stay safe and stay healthy. And I look forward to seeing you soon. Till then, take care and God bless. Bye-bye.